It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and the sun streamed through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the living room. Mary sat on the old, floral-patterned armchair, a book in her hands, though her mind wandered far from the pages. She was still adjusting to the slower pace of life after the children moved out, leaving just her and John in the house they had built together, year after year. The house was silent, the kind of silence that spoke louder than any words. John had always been a creature of routine. He'd leave for work early, return around 6, and then they'd share dinner and conversation. The simplicity of their lives suited Mary. She never thought she'd be the kind of woman to crave excitement. Yet, on this quiet afternoon, as she sat idly by, there was an odd sense of unease that she couldn't shake. She glanced around the room, her eyes drifting across the familiar furniture, the photos of their children, the bookshelves packed with novels, the knickknacks they had collected over the years. It all felt so normal. But beneath the normality, there was a lingering tension, something she couldn't name. It had been growing for months now, a slow creeping discomfort that seemed to come from nowhere. That afternoon, Mary had decided to do something she hadn't done in a while. She'd clean. Not a full spring cleaning, but a little tidying up. She started with the bookshelf, dusting off the shelves one by one, running her fingers over the spines of the books, when something unusual caught her eye. There, under the corner of the armchair, was an envelope. It was strange, she didn't remember seeing it there before. She had vacuumed the area just the week before. It wasn't uncommon for things to get misplaced, but an envelope tucked under the chair? That was odd. Curiosity got the best of her. She stood up, knees creaking as she bent down to retrieve it. As soon as her fingers brushed the edge of the paper, a strange sense of foreboding washed over her. It wasn't a regular envelope. It was thicker, heavier, and had a faint, musty smell. The paper was rough to the touch, like it had been handled many times. Her heart skipped a beat. It was addressed to John. John, the name was written in bold, hurried script. It wasn't a handwriting she recognized. Mary frowned, her mind racing. John usually kept everything so organized. If anyone was meticulous about keeping things in their place, it was him. If he had received a letter, surely it would be in his office or on his desk. Why was it hidden under the armchair? She tore open the envelope slowly, trying to resist the impulse to rip it apart in haste. Her eyes scanned the paper. The first sentence sent a chill straight through her. It's time. The plan is set. Everything is in place. Don't turn back now. Her mind froze for a moment. What plan? What was this letter about? Who was this from? She scanned the page again, her hands trembling slightly. The words didn't make sense. The letter was short. Almost too short, and yet it felt like a puzzle she couldn't solve. There was no return address, no signature, just those chilling words. Her thoughts spiraled. Her mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. Had John been planning something behind her back? Was he involved in something dangerous, something illegal? No, that couldn't be true. He'd always been the steady, reliable one, the person she could count on. He would never do anything reckless. But still, the words echoed in her mind, the plan is set. Don't turn back now. A wave of nausea rolled through her. Was he involved in some kind of conspiracy? Had he been hiding it all from her? She could feel the warmth draining from her skin as a heavy weight settled in her chest. She thought she knew John, had known him for over 35 years, but now, she wasn't so sure. Suddenly, the house felt unnervingly quiet. The ticking of the clock on the wall was deafening. Mary quickly folded the letter and shoved it back into the envelope, her movements jerky and frantic. She shoved the letter under the chair where she had found it, trying to make it look like nothing had been disturbed. Then, she froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The door creaked open. John had arrived home. She could hear his footsteps as they echoed in the hallway, muffled but unmistakable. His voice, calm and even, called out from the doorway. "Mary? I'm home." Mary stood there, heart pounding, a cold sweat starting to form at the back of her neck. She didn't know what to do. Should she confront him? Should she ask him what this letter meant? But how could she? She couldn't tell him she had gone snooping around his things. She had no right to do that. Or did she? Her mind raced as she quickly moved away from the chair, trying to act casual, to cover up the chaos brewing inside her. She tossed the letter beneath the seat cushions of the chair and plastered a smile on her face as she turned toward him. John walked into the room, his face a little more worn than usual, his hair slightly askew as if he'd had a long day. But then, there was something in his eyes. Something that made Mary's heart lurch. He looked at her with an intensity that was foreign, almost calculating. His eyes narrowed, studying her in a way she wasn't used to. "You okay?" he asked, his voice sounding slightly strained, though his words were casual. He didn't look tired, he looked on edge. "Yeah," Mary replied, her voice tight. Just a little tired." John didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced around the room, his gaze flicking toward the chair where Mary had just been standing. She felt her pulse quicken, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Did he know? Did he suspect? There was a long pause before John walked toward her, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. He reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, but it didn't feel comforting. It felt like he was measuring her, trying to gauge something. "Are you sure everything's all right?" he asked again, this time with a hint of something else in his voice, something Mary couldn't place. "I'm fine," she said quickly, too quickly. Her eyes darted to the chair. The envelope was still hidden. But she couldn't shake the feeling that John knew something wasn't right. The way he was looking at her made her feel like he was waiting for her to say something. John stood there for a moment longer, his gaze lingering. Then, with a slow exhale, he nodded. "All right. Just don't forget, we have dinner with the Johnsons tomorrow. Don't be late." He turned and walked away, but Mary's heart didn't slow down. She stood there for a long time, her mind reeling. What was going on? Why did John look at her like that? And what was the letter about? She had never felt more uncertain in her life. She had trusted John with everything, his secrets, his past, their future. But now, she wasn't sure if she even knew the man standing just a few rooms away. The mystery had only just begun. And Mary knew, deep down, that it would lead her somewhere she didn't expect. The question was, where? Mary spent the rest of that evening in a fog, her mind consumed by the letter. Dinner was a blur. She and John sat across from each other, the conversation flowing, but it felt distant, almost mechanical. She could barely focus on his words. She was watching him, studying him, trying to figure out what he was hiding. The way he had looked at her earlier, it was like he knew something was wrong. But if he knew she had found the letter, why hadn't he confronted her? Was he testing her? Or was he trying to throw her off the scent, pretending everything was fine? "Mary?" John's voice broke through her thoughts, his brow furrowing with concern. "You're awfully quiet tonight. Something on your mind?" She looked up, startled. He was staring at her, his fork halfway to his mouth, waiting for an answer. His eyes were soft, almost caring, but Mary could see the subtle edge in them. His calm demeanor was starting to unravel her composure. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice a little too high. Just thinking about some things." She forced a smile, but it felt hollow, like a mask she couldn't keep in place. John nodded, his lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, don't overthink it too much. Everything will be fine. It always is." It wasn't fine. Mary knew that. Nothing about the situation felt fine. As soon as dinner was over, she excused herself, claiming exhaustion. She couldn't stand being in the same room as John for another second, not with the weight of the letter pressing down on her. Her fingers itched to uncover more, to unravel whatever it was he was hiding. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She made her way to their bedroom, but instead of heading straight for the bed, she sat down in the small chair by the window. The house was quiet again, the only sound the distant hum of traffic outside. Mary glanced over at John, who was sitting in the living room, flipping through the newspaper. He seemed so normal. So calm. But the calm was like a veneer, beneath it, something was simmering. Her mind raced. She had to find out more. She couldn't leave this mystery unsolved, not when it had already begun to unravel everything she thought she knew about her husband. Her eyes drifted to the drawer by her side of the bed. It was small but filled with the little things she had collected over the years: jewelry, letters, old photographs. She had always been one to keep things organized, to hold on to memories, even if John didn't always understand why. But now, her gaze settled on something far more important than any of the keepsakes. The small lockbox. It wasn't something Mary had ever paid much attention to. It had been tucked away in the back of the drawer for as long as she could remember. John had always kept it there, and she had assumed it contained old family documents, maybe some personal items from his past. He'd never spoken much about it, and she had never felt the need to ask. It had become just another piece of furniture, another thing that existed but didn't need attention. But now, with the letter still weighing on her mind, she felt a burning curiosity. Could it hold more answers? Was this lockbox connected to the plan he was involved in? Her breath quickened as she stood up and made her way toward the drawer. Her fingers hovered over the small metal key, which she had never thought much of before. She pulled it out, feeling its cool surface against her fingertips, and walked slowly toward the lockbox. It was heavier than she expected, its surface cold and unyielding. She hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of her decision. If she opened it, there was no turning back. She would know, for better or for worse, what John was hiding. Her hand shook slightly as she inserted the key into the lock. The mechanism clicked open, and the lid lifted with a soft creak. The inside of the box was lined with dark velvet, and as she peered inside, her heart skipped a beat. There were several items inside: papers, photographs, and small trinkets. But what caught her eye immediately was a folder. It was thick and neatly organized, unlike anything she had ever seen in their home. Mary hesitated, wondering if she should look through it. But the compulsion to know what was inside was too great. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she opened the folder. The first page was filled with handwritten notes, most of them in the same sharp handwriting from the letter. The words were fragmented, scattered, as though they were pieces of a puzzle. Mary read aloud under her breath, trying to make sense of the mess of sentences. Time is running out. The plan must be executed soon. Contact the others. Confirm the location. Her breath hitched in her chest. What was this? Was John really involved in something so sinister? The words on the page felt like they were written in code, as though they were meant to be deciphered, but Mary couldn't make sense of them. The sense of dread in her chest grew heavier. She flipped through more pages, each one more cryptic than the last. Some were lists of names, others coordinates, locations that meant nothing to her. There were maps, drawings, and diagrams that she couldn't understand. But the more she looked, the more she realized how meticulous this plan was. It was not a small thing. It was something large, something dangerous. A name at the bottom of the page caught her attention: Carter Westfield. She had never heard that name before. Who was he? Why was he involved in this plan? Suddenly, a voice broke through her thoughts. Mary? Her heart leapt into her throat. She quickly shoved the folder back into the box, snapping the lid shut just as John appeared in the doorway. His eyes were dark, his face tight with tension. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. Mary froze, the blood draining from her face. She hadn't heard him coming. How much had he seen? How much had he known? "Nothing," she said, her voice too steady. "Just. I thought I heard something." She turned quickly to shut the drawer, her hands shaking. John didn't move, didn't speak. He stood in the doorway, his eyes boring into her as if trying to see inside her mind. His gaze was hard, unreadable. Mary could feel the weight of it, pressing down on her, suffocating her. "Mary," he said after a long, tense pause. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Her mind raced. Should she tell him what she had found? Should she confront him, or keep pretending that everything was normal? The letter, the box, it was all too much to ignore. But the fear of what might happen if she pushed him too far held her back. "No," she whispered, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Nothing." John's expression softened for a brief moment, but the tension never fully left his face. "All right," he said quietly. "If you're sure." He turned and walked away, but this time, Mary didn't feel the relief she had expected. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever. He had known something wasn't right. He had to have known. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was okay. The truth was, she wasn't sure if she could ever go back to the life she had before. The mystery was no longer just a curiosity, it was a force that had taken hold of her, pulling her deeper into a world of secrets she wasn't sure she could escape from. The mystery was only just beginning. And Mary was in too deep to turn back now. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty and tension. Mary couldn't escape the feeling that something was closing in on her, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. Every moment she spent with John felt like walking on a razor's edge, each word he spoke, each look he gave her, layered with unspoken meaning. She couldn't stop herself from wondering, did he know she had discovered the lockbox? Had he seen the fear in her eyes when he caught her that night, right at the moment she had been searching for answers? She tried to act normal. They went through the motions of their daily routine, but the normalcy felt like a cruel charade, a thin veneer over something darker that neither of them was willing to address. At night, when she lay in bed beside him, the silence between them seemed to echo in her mind. The memory of the letter, the cryptic notes in the folder, and the name, Carter Westfield, haunted her thoughts. Who was Carter? What did he have to do with all of this? And why was John involved in something that seemed so clandestine, so secretive? It was a cold Wednesday evening when the breaking point came. Mary had just finished preparing dinner, the smell of roasted chicken filling the house. She set the table, trying to ignore the gnawing sense of dread that had settled deep in her stomach. It was the same feeling she'd had ever since that fateful day she found the letter, but tonight, it was worse. Tonight, she could feel that something was about to break wide open. John had been unusually quiet all day. He hadn't said much during breakfast, and when she'd asked him how his day had gone, he'd simply muttered, "Fine," before retreating into his study. Mary didn't know what he was doing in there, but she had a sinking feeling that it had something to do with the secrets he had been keeping from her. As the minutes passed and the sound of the clock ticking grew louder in the stillness of the house, Mary found herself unable to sit still. She paced the kitchen, staring at the door to the study, her fingers itching to find out more. There was so much she didn't know, so much John had kept from her. But tonight, she would get the answers. She had to. With a deep breath, she set the serving dishes down on the table and wiped her hands on a towel. The smell of the roast chicken seemed to fill the entire house, but it did little to settle the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "John," she called out, her voice tentative. There was no response. She frowned, stepping toward the study. He had to be in there. She could hear the soft rustling of papers when she stood by the door, as though he was deep in thought, trying to hide something from her. With a resolve she didn't know she had, Mary pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges punctuating the heavy silence that had fallen over the house. The sight of John sitting at his desk, his back turned to her, caught her breath. He hadn't even looked up when she entered. His focus was entirely on the papers before him, scattered across the desk like an unfinished puzzle. "John, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. John didn't turn around immediately, and for a moment, the silence stretched between them like a vast chasm. Finally, he looked up, his face unreadable. His eyes met hers, but there was something different in them, a guardedness, a wariness, that had never been there before. "Mary," he said, his voice low, almost casual. "I thought I told you I needed some space tonight. Can it wait?" But Mary couldn't wait anymore. She was already standing in the doorway, her heart hammering in her chest as she took a step closer. "No, it can't," she replied, her words sharp. "You've been hiding something from me. And I need to know what it is." John's face went still, his hands pausing mid-motion. The air between them seemed to freeze, and for a moment, time itself hung suspended. Mary could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the pressure of unspoken truths filling the room. She couldn't back down now, not when she was so close to the truth. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice clipped, but there was an edge to it now, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Oh, I think you do," she replied, taking another step forward. "I found the letter, John. The one you've been hiding. The one that talks about a plan. About people. And Carter Westfield." At the mention of the name, John's entire demeanor changed. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he quickly masked it with a forced calm. But Mary had seen it. She had seen the flicker of panic, the flash of something deeper, darker. "Mary," John started, but his voice faltered, and for the first time, Mary saw a crack in his carefully constructed facade. "Who is Carter?" Mary demanded, her voice rising. "What is this plan? What are you involved in?" John stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. He turned to face her fully, his expression one of barely contained frustration. "I told you, I don't want you involved in this, Mary. This is bigger than us. It's not something you can't just understand." Mary's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him. "Understand," she repeated incredulously. "What is there to understand, John? You've been lying to me. Hiding things. And now you're telling me I can't understand what you've been doing behind my back." John ran a hand through his hair, his breath coming out in a frustrated exhale. "I didn't want you to be involved in any of this. I never wanted you to find out. But now that you've pushed me, I don't know how to keep you safe from this." "Safe from what?" Mary's voice cracked with the weight of the question. "From you? From whatever it is you've gotten yourself mixed up in?" John hesitated for a long time, his gaze drifting away from hers, as though he were struggling to decide whether to speak the truth or continue to protect her from him, from whatever dangerous situation he had gotten himself into. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he spoke. "Carter Westfield isn't just some name, Mary. He's not just someone from my past. He's the reason I'm involved in this at all. John faltered, struggling to find the right words. "He's a man who has power, influence. And I've been working with him, on something that could change everything. But I swear to you, I didn't want you to be a part of it. I never wanted you to find out." Mary's head spun as she processed his words. Carter Westfield. A man with power. And John had been working with him on something that had now brought danger into their lives. But what exactly had John gotten himself into? What was this plan he kept talking about? And why hadn't he told her the truth sooner? "Why, John?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? John looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. I thought I could protect you from it. I thought I could keep you safe. But it's too late now, Mary. It's all out in the open, and there's no turning back. Mary took a step back, her mind racing. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything John had just revealed. She had always known her husband as a man of integrity, someone who would never betray her. But now, she was faced with a truth she couldn't ignore. John had been living in a world she never even knew existed. A world filled with danger, secrets, and lies. And now, that world was closing in on them both. What are we going to do? Mary asked, her voice small. John looked at her with a mixture of guilt and determination. I don't know yet. But I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. I promise. Mary nodded slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure, their lives would never be the same again. The next morning, Mary awoke with a heavy heart. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting faint rays across the bedroom, but they did little to brighten her mood. John was already awake, though he hadn't yet left the room. She could feel him beside her, but there was a wall between them now, a wall made of unspoken words, of confusion, of fear. The weight of what had happened the previous night still hung over her. John had finally admitted the truth, that his involvement with Carter Westfield was not just a simple mistake or a passing job, it was part of something larger, something dangerous. But what? What was this plan they were working on? How deep had John gotten into this web of secrets? Mary turned toward him, her mind spinning with questions. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the window, his face drawn and weary. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper now, as if the burden of what he had kept hidden for so long had finally taken its toll. John, she said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was tentative, fragile, as though she feared the wrong words would shatter the fragile peace they had managed to find between them. He turned toward her, his face softening when he saw the concern in her eyes. But there was still that guarded look in his expression. It was as though he had built a wall around himself to protect her, but in doing so, he had isolated himself from her as well. Are you okay? Mary asked, her words a little too soft, a little too unsure. John's lips curved into a small, faint smile. I'm okay, he said, though his tone didn't carry the reassurance he probably intended. I've been through worse. But I think we need to talk about what comes next. Mary swallowed, her throat dry. What do you mean? Last night, you heard the truth, John said, his voice steady now, but with a deep undertone of tension. And now that you know, we're both involved. There's no going back from this. It's not just my mess anymore. It's ours. Mary's stomach tightened at his words. She had known this was coming, the point of no return. She had seen it in his eyes the night before, when he had told her they were in too deep. But hearing him say it out loud made it real, and the reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. Why did you keep it from me, John? She asked, her voice breaking slightly. Why didn't you tell me sooner? John looked at her, his eyes clouded with regret. I thought I was protecting you, Mary. I didn't want you to get caught up in this. But I see now that it was selfish. And I'm sorry. Mary nodded, though the ache in her chest didn't lessen. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this was just a mistake, that John hadn't meant to drag her into this dangerous web of secrets. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she didn't know. And the unknown was the most terrifying thing of all. Okay, she said after a long silence. So what happens now? John hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and serious. I don't know, he said. But I can't leave this behind. Carter Westfield has made it clear that there's no turning back. I'm in this too deep. But I can get us out. I'll figure out a way. Just trust me. Mary stared at him, her eyes searching his face for some sign that he was telling the truth. But all she saw was a man who had been ensnared by forces beyond his control, a man who had fallen into something that was too big, too dangerous for him to handle alone. And now she was caught up in it with him. "Do you really think we can get out of this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we escape whatever this is?" John's expression darkened, the weight of the question clearly weighing on him. "I don't know. But I'm going to try. And I'm going to protect you. You have to trust me, Mary." Her mind raced as she tried to process everything. Trust him? How could she trust him when he had kept so many secrets from her? How could she trust him when she had no idea what they were really up against? But looking into his eyes, she saw something there, something that gave her a small sliver of hope. John was scared. She could see it in the tightness of his jaw, in the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. He was just as lost as she was, just as desperate to find a way out of this mess. "I'm scared, John," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know what's happening. I don't know who to trust anymore." John reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know, Mary. I know. But we'll figure it out together. I'll make sure you're safe. I'll fix this. I swear to you." For a moment, Mary allowed herself to lean into him, her head resting on his shoulder as they sat in silence. The quiet of the morning was deafening, the air thick with unsaid words and fears that neither of them could voice. Later that day. By afternoon, the mood in the house had shifted. Mary and John sat together at the kitchen table, the same spot where they had shared countless meals, laughing and talking without a care in the world. But now, the atmosphere was different. The tension between them was palpable, the unsaid things hanging heavy in the air. John had spent the morning making calls, talking to people that Mary didn't know. She could hear the urgency in his voice, the way he tried to maintain control of the situation, but the strain was evident. It was clear that whatever he had gotten involved in with Carter Westfield was unraveling faster than he could handle. "I don't like this," John said, placing the phone down with a frustrated sigh. "The people I've been working with, they're starting to get nervous. And when they get nervous, things get messy." "What does that mean?" Mary asked, her eyes narrowing. "It means that whatever Carter is planning is bigger than I thought. It's not just a small operation anymore. He's pulling in people from all over, people I don't trust, people who are dangerous. I don't know if we can outrun this, Mary. I don't know if I can protect you from it." Mary swallowed hard, the reality of the situation crashing down on her. She had been trying to hold on to the hope that somehow, John could fix this, that everything would return to normal. But now, she realized how foolish that hope had been. There was no going back. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. "We need to know everything, John," she said, her voice firm. "We need to know what Carter is planning. We need to understand the scope of this. I can't just sit here while you try to protect me. I have to know." John looked at her, his eyes conflicted. "I don't want to involve you more than I already have." "I'm already involved, John," Mary said, her voice shaking with the intensity of her emotions. "We're already in this. I need to know what's going on. I need to know the truth." John hesitated for a long moment, then sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping with defeat. "All right," he said. "I'll tell you everything. But it's not going to be easy. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better." Mary nodded, bracing herself for what she was about to hear. She had no idea how deep John's involvement with Carter went, or how far this plan stretched. But whatever it was clear that they had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. A dark revelation. The next few hours were filled with uncomfortable silence and cautious conversations. John shared more about his involvement with Carter Westfield, and the more he spoke, the clearer it became how deeply entrenched he was in this dangerous game. "Carter is planning something big," John said, his voice low and serious. "It's not just about money, or power. It's about control. He's been building an underground network for years, people with influence, people who control entire industries. He wants to take that power and use it to manipulate governments, to create chaos. And he's been recruiting people like me to help him execute his plan." Mary listened, her heart racing as the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. "So, this isn't just a criminal operation. This is a power play." "Yes," John replied. "Exactly. Carter isn't just a businessman. He's a mastermind. And I've been helping him get everything in place for the final phase." "And now?" Mary asked, her voice shaking. "What happens now?" John paused, his eyes darkening. "Now, we have to stop him." The days following John's revelation about Carter Westfield were a blur. Mary's mind struggled to process everything she had learned. Every minute felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. The quiet hum of the house, which used to bring her comfort, now seemed unnervingly hollow. The familiar faces of their neighbors, the sound of the mail being dropped through the door, the casual chatter with friends, everything felt distant, almost foreign. Life as she had known it had ended, and there was no going back. John seemed more distant than ever. Though they still spoke, the man she had known, her husband, the man who once seemed so grounded and reliable, was changing before her eyes. The fear in his eyes, the constant phone calls with people whose voices she couldn't hear, the cryptic conversations, it all pointed to something far darker than she had ever imagined. The sense of urgency had taken over their lives. John spent most of his time on the phone or in his study, his eyes glued to a series of notes, maps, and documents. Mary noticed the sleepless nights, the bags under his eyes, the constant tension in his shoulders. She could tell he was on edge. But what terrified her more was the idea that he had no control over the situation. That he was as much a pawn in this game as she was. The difference was, he had known about it for years. And yet, despite everything, he refused to give up. John's decision to stop Carter Westfield and dismantle the operation had become an obsession. There was no turning back now. The reality of what they were facing had hit home hard. The people Carter had pulled into his world, people who operated in the shadows, behind closed doors, were not the kind of individuals who simply walked away from their plans. Mary had tried to make him reconsider, to understand the danger of challenging Carter and his network. But John's mind was made up. His guilt weighed too heavily on him, and the idea of leaving the situation unresolved gnawed at him. He had already crossed the point of no return. But despite everything John was doing to keep her safe, Mary still felt the gnawing fear deep within her, a fear she couldn't shake. She wasn't sure if it was because of the danger that loomed over them, or because of the nagging suspicion that John might not be as strong as he thought. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was going to go wrong. A visit from an unlikely source. It was late one evening when things finally came to a head. John had been pacing the living room for hours, his hand running through his hair in frustration. He had just come off the phone with a contact who had given him more bad news. Carter was moving faster than they had anticipated, and their window to stop him was quickly closing. John's entire body seemed to radiate tension, as though every fiber of his being was on edge. Mary sat quietly on the couch, watching him, her mind racing. Every part of her wanted to jump up, to shout at him to stop, to tell him that this wasn't the way to go. But she knew it was too late. The train had left the station, and there was no way to stop it now. Just as John was about to leave for another meeting, the doorbell rang. Mary startled, glancing at John, who froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "Who is that?" she asked, confused. John hesitated before answering. "I'm not sure." "Stay here." He walked to the door and opened it cautiously, his face tense. A man stood on the other side, tall, with dark hair and a sharp, angular face. His eyes were calculating, assessing, and for a split second, Mary felt a shiver of unease run down her spine. This was no ordinary visitor. "John," the man said in a low voice. "We need to talk." John's gaze flickered back toward Mary before he stepped aside and gestured for the man to enter. The man walked into the room with a sense of authority, his movements measured and deliberate. Mary stood up slowly, her instinct screaming that something wasn't right. She tried to read the man's body language, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. The man looked at her briefly before turning back to John. "This situation has escalated. I think you know that. We don't have much time." John's face hardened. "I know. But we can't move until we know the full scope of what Carter is planning. We need more intel." "I'm not going in blind." "Blinded or not," the man replied coldly, "you're already in. This is bigger than you think, and it's too late to back out now. You're already a part of this." His gaze shifted to Mary, and a brief, almost imperceptible smile crossed his face before he turned back to John. "The question is, how far are you willing to go?" Mary felt her stomach drop. Something in the way the man spoke, his tone, his look, told her that this wasn't just about business. This was personal. "Who are you?" she asked before she could stop herself, her voice sharp with suspicion. The man glanced at her, his smile fading. "Someone who can help. If you're smart, you'll stay out of this." John stepped forward, placing a hand on Mary's shoulder as though to reassure her. "Don't worry about it," he said to her softly. We're getting a clearer picture of things." The man nodded in agreement, but Mary could see the tension in his face, the way he shifted his weight as if constantly assessing the room. "I've been following Carter's movements," the man continued. "And I have information you'll need. It's dangerous, though. If you take it, you'll be in this for good." John didn't hesitate. "I'm already in this. Tell me what you know." The man pulled out a small folder from his coat, sliding it across the table to John. "This is what I've got. It's not much, but it's enough to make a move. But once you have it, there's no going back. You'll have to act fast." John opened the folder, scanning the contents, his eyes widening as he absorbed the information. The more he read, the more Mary could see the weight of what was in the file bearing down on him. He looked up at the man with a grim expression. "You're sure about this?" The man didn't reply immediately. He just looked at John with an unreadable expression, then glanced at Mary, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. Without another word, the man turned and walked toward the door, leaving John staring down at the papers in his hands. Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. A plan in motion. Later that night, John sat at the kitchen table, his head buried in the papers from the mysterious man. Mary watched him from the doorway, her mind in turmoil. She had tried to convince herself that John could fix this, that he could get them out of this mess. But the longer she watched him, the more she realized how out of control the situation had become. The man had been right about one thing: there was no going back. John's eyes flickered up to meet hers, and for a moment, he seemed to come back to the present, as if breaking free from the intensity of what he had been reading. His expression softened, but only slightly. "Mary, I need you to stay calm. I don't know how bad things are about to get, but I need you to trust me." "I don't know if I can," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." John's expression faltered, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable, like a man who had made one too many wrong decisions. "I've messed up. I know that. But I'm trying to fix this. And I need your help." Mary took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know if I can help you." "John. I'm scared. I don't know who to trust anymore. John closed his eyes for a brief moment, his fingers massaging his temples. When he opened them again, there was a flicker of determination. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. I don't care what happens to me. I just need to make sure you're okay. The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache, but it also terrified her. She had seen the darkness in his eyes before, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were too deep in to escape now. We need to make a move, John said, standing up abruptly. We have to act before Carter does. Mary nodded, though she wasn't sure what he meant. What's the plan? John hesitated, looking at her for a long moment. I'm going after Carter. I'm going to bring him down, no matter what it takes. The wind outside howled against the windows, rattling the panes like warning whispers from the night. The house stood still in the thick, uneasy silence, broken only by the sound of John's footsteps moving from room to room. He was preparing for something final. Mary could see it in his eyes. The way he moved, the way he handled the manila folder from the stranger, the tension in his jaw, all signs pointed to one undeniable truth. This was it. The end of the road. Mary sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of tea she hadn't touched in over an hour. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the sinking knowledge that her life was hanging in balance. She thought she had known John. She had believed in their quiet, predictable life. But this past week had shattered everything. Now, the man she loved was headed straight into danger, carrying the weight of years of secrets, lies, and guilt. He hadn't shared every detail of the plan, but he had told her enough. He was going to expose Carter Westfield, publicly, and fully, no matter the risk. Mary feared she might never see him again. Are you sure you have to do this? She finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. John stopped, turning to her slowly. His expression was tired, not just physically, but spiritually. Yet behind that exhaustion was resolve. A deep, final sort of clarity. I have to, he said. If I don't, everything we've lived, all of it, will mean nothing. And Carter will continue, hurting more people. It ends tonight. Mary nodded, though tears brimmed in her eyes. Just, promise me one thing. He moved closer, kneeling beside her. Anything. If you don't come back, at least make sure the truth does. John took her hand in his, holding it tightly. I promise. Then he stood, picked up the folder, slipped it into a secure briefcase, and walked toward the front door. Be careful, Mary whispered. He paused for just a moment, looked back at her, then stepped into the cold night. The meeting place. The meeting was set for 10 p.m. The location, an old industrial warehouse on the edge of the city. The kind of place where no one asked questions and nobody lingered after dark. John parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance under the cover of night. The air was heavy with the scent of rust, oil, and rain-soaked concrete. Every sound, a distant dog bark, the screech of tires in the distance, the rustle of wind through dead leaves, felt amplified, almost accusatory. Inside the warehouse, Carter Westfield was already waiting. He stood with his back to John, dressed in a tailored overcoat, smoking a cigar as if he had all the time in the world. Several men stood around him, sharp suits, earpieces, expressionless faces. Security, clearly. John approached without hesitation. You brought it? Carter asked, not turning around. John held up the briefcase. Everything. Names, files, dates. Your entire operation. Carter finally turned, his face a portrait of smug calm. And what do you want for it? Nothing, John replied, voice steady. I'm not here to bargain. I'm here to end this. Carter raised an eyebrow. You really think handing this over will end anything? No, John said. That's why I already sent copies to 2 journalists, an attorney, and someone in the police force I trust. If anything happens to me, or to Mary, the files go public. Instantly. Carter's face darkened. For the first time, John saw something crack in that carefully constructed mask of superiority. "You always were too idealistic," Carter muttered. "That's what made you easy to use. But stupid men like you don't win. They just bleed." John didn't flinch. "I've bled already, Carter. For years. I won't let you hurt anyone else." Carter's men tensed, hands drifting toward weapons. John calmly placed the briefcase on a nearby table and stepped back. "I'm done playing your game. The truth is out. You can try to stop it, or you can run." There was a long, tense silence. Then, a voice echoed from outside the warehouse. "Police. Drop your weapons. Hands where we can see them." Spotlights blazed through the warehouse windows. Sirens screamed in the distance. Dozens of officers swarmed through every entrance. John raised his hands slowly and stepped aside. Chaos exploded. Carter's men pulled weapons, only to be overwhelmed in seconds. Flashlights, shouting, the clatter of cuffs snapping shut. In the chaos, Carter tried to slip away through a side door, only to be tackled by two undercover agents. John watched, numb, as the man who had once controlled his entire world was dragged away in handcuffs. The nightmare was over. Back at home. It was nearly 3 a.m. when John returned home. Mary was still awake, curled on the sofa, too anxious to sleep. When she saw him step through the door, covered in dust, exhausted but alive, she burst into tears. He moved toward her and wrapped his arms around her tightly. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she let herself breathe. "You're home," she whispered. "I'm home," he echoed. "And it's done." They stayed like that for a long time, just holding on. 3 weeks later. The story broke across every major news outlet. Multi-million-dollar fraud network exposed by retired financial advisor. John didn't go public. He let the journalists handle the story. He refused interviews. Refused attention. His only priority now was rebuilding the quiet life he had nearly destroyed. Carter Westfield was facing multiple federal charges: fraud, racketeering, blackmail. Several high-level partners were also indicted. The damage they had caused would take years to unravel, but at least, the healing could begin. John and Mary took time to reconnect. Long walks. Cooking together. Talking late into the night. Slowly, painfully, the wounds began to heal. But things would never go back to what they were. And maybe that was okay. Epilogue, the letter. 1 month after the story broke, Mary found a sealed envelope in the mailbox, addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Mrs. Walker. You don't know me. But your husband saved my life. Years ago, I was just a number to Carter Westfield. A pawn in a system I didn't understand. Because of what your husband did, because he exposed them, I finally have a chance at a real life. Thank you. A survivor. Mary read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. A soft smile touched her lips. Maybe they would never fully escape the shadows of the past. But they had brought light into places that had stayed dark for too long. The lesson. Truth isn't always clean. Justice doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes, standing up for what's right costs more than we expect, more than we think we can bear. But it matters. Because the courage to face the truth, to right a wrong, even when it terrifies us, that courage can change everything. John Walker wasn't a hero in shining armor. He was just a man who made a mistake, and then found the strength to make it right. And sometimes, that's all it takes.